Chapter 43, The Engine. The storm had gotten even stronger than before. Huge, powerful waves were hitting the boat hard, making it rock from side to side. The motorcycle on the deck was banging into the cabin with relentless force. A half-empty bottle of whiskey had fallen on the deck and was rolling back and forth. Suddenly, the engine stopped working. The professor tried a few times to restart it, but eventually gave up and sat down beside Azer on the bench. The steering wheel moved on its own in a casual direction. Without the engine running, the boat was left to the mercy of the storm. Azer felt like they were in a tiny nutshell, tossed around by the violent storm. He started to feel seasick. The boat's wild rocking was almost like being inside a spinning washing machine. He looked at the professor and asked, "Has the engine ever stopped by itself before?" The professor answered, "Yeah, a couple of times before. I think the engine is too old and needs replacing." Azer suggested, "It might also be a loose wire connection that the storm made worse." The professor nodded and said, "You could be right." Azer inquired, "Do we have any tools on board?" The professor knocked on the storage bench they were sitting on and replied, "There are some tools here. But I think the previous owner might have a proper toolbox down in the engine room." Azer stood up and said, "Mind if I check out the engine?" "Go for it. Otherwise, sooner or later, the storm might sink us," the professor added, getting up. "I think there's a flashlight in this box. If we're lucky, there might be batteries too." Azer found the flashlight, but he had to tap it a few times in his palm before it turned on. He lifted the hatch on the deck, went down the stairs, and started searching for the toolbox. The Norwegian owner had taken good care of the boat. The engine room was neat and organized. However, when the engine stopped, the emergency pump that was keeping the leaked water out had also stopped. The heavy motorcycle on board had widened the cracks in the boat, and a significant amount of water had collected at the bottom of the engine room. The professor leaned through the hatch, holding the flashlight for Azer. When he saw the water inside, he said, "It's worse than I thought. We might need to abandon ship if you can't fix the engine." Azer noticed some old wooden boxes labeled "Dynamite" in a corner. They were carefully wrapped in plastic to stay dry. Azer knew that these original boxes were valuable collectibles. He guessed the professor had bought them at an auction. He found the toolbox in another corner. He picked up a good-sized adjustable wrench and a small file. The professor looked at him curiously and asked, "Did you find what you needed?" Azer replied confidently, "Let's see." Looking at the professor, he requested, "Can you point the light at the battery?" "Of course," the professor said, but it was challenging with the boat rocking so violently. The professor noticed the adjustable wrench in Azer's hand and remarked, "In Germany, we call that tool an English spanner. I heard it's called a French spanner in Iran." Azer smiled and said, "In Denmark, we call it a Swedish spanner. I think in Spain, they also call it an English spanner." The professor laughed and said, "It sounds interesting. I have always been fascinated by these linguistic nuances." Even though the professor knew a lot about the tool, he wasn't used to using it. Azer disconnected the plus and minus wires from the battery and cleaned the oxidized surfaces with the file. He screwed the wires back on. He was worried about the sparks, that they would cause an explosion, as the boat reeked of gasoline. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Everything else seemed fine. He put the tools back and climbed up the stairs. On the first try, the professor managed to start the engine. He gave Azer a thumbs up and said, "Impressive."